Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 1381. Authority. Inside the White Tower, the headquarters of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. After Luca Brewster, who was trapped underground, completed his prayer, he focused his attention back on the seal autonomously strengthening itself. He wanted to find out exactly what was going on, to see if he could decipher the secrets hidden within and use them to invent some mystical techniques. As he proceeded down each level, checking each and every sealed artifact, Luca was taken aback and stopped in his tracks. His expression became rather confused. He was lost on whether to take his next step with his left foot or right foot. This seemed to be a very profound, esoteric question to comprehend. In the southern continent, beside a cathedral belonging to the Evernight goddess, Leonard picked up the cup of coffee made from local ground beans and wanted to take a sip. During this process, his thoughts wandered to the closed windows and the bright sky, trying to figure out the anomaly. However, he was unable to leave the room and was sealed here. As for Old Man Palazzoros, he had fallen into a strange state of silence without answering his questions. Thankfully, there wasn't any additional danger. Therefore, Leonard could still sit in peace, using thoughts to replace action. After an unknown period of time, he looked down at the cup of coffee that had been placed back on the table. He frowned slightly and muttered to himself in puzzlement. What did I want to do just now? The Rorstad Archipelago, in the concealed Biome City. Having not noticed the changes in the environment, Danitz carefully fiddled with the telegraph device in his room. The Golden Dream had recently come to the Sonia Sea and stopped at a port with a telegraph office. Danitz wanted to invite them over to Biome as guests to take in the grandeur of a Lord's Oracle. If possible, he wished that the Golden Dream could use Biome as its primary harbor. This way, he could return to the ship at any time to participate in adventures and seek out treasures. At the same time, he could choose to listen to the captain's lectures. As an all-rounder, Danitz had no doubt mastered all the knowledge and techniques needed to send a telegram. At that moment, he sat in front of the machine and quickly tapped his fingers, sending out the words he had constructed. At the very beginning, his thoughts were clear and his words were proper. This left him somewhat smug. Gradually, his eyes stared straight, and his hands didn't stop moving, as if he was doing it on instinct. After the telegram was sent out, Danitz exhaled, picked up a cup, and gulped down a mouthful of beer. It was quicker than I expected. Even if I lose my job in the future, I can still go to the telegraph office to get a job with a good salary, Danitz thought proudly and worriedly. He casually picked up the telegram draft and recalled the process of how he sent it out. His expression gradually turned odd. What did I send in the end? Danitz couldn't help but whisper. Apparently, he had very likely mocked the first mate, second mate, iron skin, and barrel towards the latter half of the telegram. Then, he passionately confessed to the captain. I'm finished. Why would I express what's hidden in my heart? Danitz's face turned pale as he suspected that he had been controlled by the potion. The content he had written didn't actually go through his head. He hurriedly sent a telegram to indicate that the content from before had nothing to do with him. It was all a result of Anderson deliberately causing trouble. At this moment, he realized that something was amiss outside. The sky was gray and there wasn't a single cloud. In the astral world, the existences and objects that had been concealed by the Evernight goddess broke through the restrictions and returned to reality one after another. They were like Amon's actual body, looking somewhat dazed without making any immediate reaction. In addition, the Evernight goddess also paused in midair in confusion, as though she hadn't thought about her subsequent actions. However, her first instinct was to protect herself. The Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, who had been restricted by the thick prism-like spots of light in their own kingdoms, also experienced certain changes. The intensity of their counterattacks was clearly lower, giving people a sense of self-doubt, unsure if the entity before them was an enemy. The genie abandoned the Trunso's brass book and directly returned to the magic wishing lamp. He seemed to have fought to his limits and had no choice but to retreat into the seal. He also seemed to recall something as he subconsciously evaded. Antigonus, who had just regained his self-awareness and lucidity, was once again confused. His face was filled with question marks. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? What is happening around me? In the forsaken land of the gods, the ancient sun god's giant shadow sighed and said, "Let there be light." The light in the astral world brightened as it stabbed into the eyes of Amon's true body avatars, primordial Demonis, hidden sage, and other existences. They immediately regained their senses and made use of the time to respond differently. The flood of information suddenly dispersed and fused with the various symbols around it, instantly disappearing. The black, python-like tentacles with an eyeball on their ends retracted rapidly. No one knew where they went. Amon's true body looked at Klein, who had just advanced, and gave up the chance to exert his influence while his condition was unstable. He raised his hand and adjusted the crystal monocle on his right eye. His figure split into multiple seemingly illusory and realistic doors. The doors opened and closed at the same time, preventing any existences like the Evernight goddess from knowing where Amon's true body had gone to. After Amon's true body left, his avatars faded and disappeared in a bizarre manner. This was using a loophole, turning the act of Amon's true body leaving to being equivalent to Amon's leaving. At the same time, the giant shadow that the ancient sun god had expanded only to shrink and transform back into Adam, who carried a thick shadow on his back. Beneath the feet of this visionary, the sea that contained all colors instantly dissipated as though it had returned underground. Looking up at the astral world, Adam returned to the back of that shadow screen through a crack. The fusion between him and the true creator had just begun, and it wasn't over yet. The attempt to raise himself to the level of half a great old one was actually rather difficult and risky. This would make their progress a lot slower in the future. In the astral world, as the war subsided, the natural barrier formed by plants and the portraits of civilization faded away, along with the illusory crimson moon. The Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and the god of knowledge and wisdom first shattered the thick spots of light outside their divine kingdoms. Then they calmed down and returned to continue blocking the world barrier's cracks. The Evernight goddess, who was floating above the ancient palace, put away the pitch-black coffin, the twilight sword, the bird-shaped, golden accessory, and her forearms. She cast her gaze downwards. After the translucent dark-colored cloak produced the mask, it transformed into Klein's body. Klein pressed one hand against the almost invisible mask on his face, and he placed the other at his abdomen. His back was slightly arched, as though he was suffering indescribable pain. Just as he raised his head and looked at the Evernight goddess's face that was covered with a thin black veil, a pitch-black cloak appeared outside his body. Slippery and sinister tentacles extended from beneath the cloak. After becoming the fool, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings in him had undoubtedly awakened further. The crazy ravings and roars continued to echo in Klein's ears, tearing through his mind, letting him know that this was going to be his future. There was no way to kill the Lord of the Mysteries. Even if his will was slowly worn down by time, his consciousness would remain forever. He could snatch Klein's body at any moment and completely revive. If it wasn't for the fact that he had just killed the Lord of the Mysteries' will, making the awakening him weaker than what Klein expected, Klein suspected that he might not be able to survive. All he could do was watch as his body collapsed, and he became another existence. Of course, he could still seek the Evernight goddess's help to give him a drop of the river of eternal darkness's river water. However, this wasn't a long-term solution. He could only delay it for some time before ultimately facing it. Relying on his own consciousness and anchors, Klein stabilized the consciousness of the celestial worthy in him. At this moment, he was unable to speak. The Evernight goddess above nodded gently and said, "What you need now is stability." With that said, her figure was wiped inch by inch as she returned to the divine kingdom in the astral world. Klein turned his head to look at the slightly dazed Antigonus. With a thought, he returned to Sapphira Castle. Sitting in the half-collapsed palace, Antigonus sat on a huge stone chair. He felt as though he had just been through a very, very long dream. Inside Sapphira Castle, Klein sat at the fool's seat and focused on stabilizing his mental state. Just like before he achieved an initial level of stability, he had no way of seeking treatment from a psychiatrist. Unless he paid a visit to Adam, it was very likely that he would go even crazier. With some stability, Klein quickly checked the authorities he obtained. It was called fooling. Not only did it contain history, time, fate, change, and concealment, but it also included the mind domains of blind stupidity. The simplest application was to lower an enemy's intelligence. Just as Klein was about to research them further, his spiritual perception was triggered. Someone had invaded Sapphira Castle, and only when the enemy successfully invaded did Klein obtain a notification. Klein suddenly looked up and saw that the grayish-white fog had formed a door at the other end of the long model table. A figure wearing a pointed hat, a classic black robe, and a monocle walked out. Amon! There was a tinge of darkness in Mr. Era's eyes as his smile appeared somewhat crazy. He leisurely looked around and nudged his monocle. He said with a smile, "Are you pleasantly surprised?" Klein wanted to use Sapphira Castle to expel him, but he realized that at some point in time, Amon had gained control over Sapphira Castle. Amon cast his gaze at him, pulled out a chair and sat down, chuckling. "I released the suppression of the Lord of the Mysteries in my body. Him being the owner of Sapphira Castle makes me equivalent to being the owner of Sapphira Castle. Of course, I can enter. This is very risky. Even in the past, I didn't dare to try it before, but since you've grown to this extent, I can only take the risk. This is very exciting. I'm quite pleased with the effects." As Amon spoke, slippery and sinister tentacles appeared beneath his clothes. He took the initiative to revive part of the Lord of the Mysteries, allowing himself to enter a half-crazy state.